I, like millions of other people, am in love with planet Earth. This is actually my quote, I'm Emily. But I just thought it sounded more grand, or looked more grand to put in quote marks up there, give me a bit of confidence. So I've always had this real curiosity and passion for nature. I was the kid that was running towards spiders, and I still do that today, still love them. But my passions are kind of the natural world and art and design. And I went down the path of art and design, and then into kind of digital design, specialized into UX design. And I absolutely love my job. I mean, today has been a good advert for being a UX designer, right? So, making the world a tiny bit better for people, or hoping to. But I always felt that I had this nagging feeling that my two passions were kept kind of disconnected. I was living two lives. I felt working in digital, I was disconnected from nature. So it was kind of a lightning bolt moment when I realized that I could connect the two together. A realization that, sustainable digital design connects nature and digital. So my goal today is to share that connection with all of you here. It's something I'm really passionate about, and I've been on this journey kind of learning all about it, and I want to bring that to you. And I've also been involved with a W3C community group, they're the organization who brought us the accessibility guidelines to do a first draft of the sustainable web guidelines. So I really encourage everyone to go and have a look at that as well after this, to get a really deep kind of understanding. But for now, I'm going to talk you through the problem and then my thoughts on a few kind of solutions as well. So, understanding the problem then. If I was to ask you what's the largest coal-powered machine ever created, I imagine that most people would be kind of picturing, big chimneys, smoke, power plants, that kind of thing. So it might surprise a lot of people to know that actually the internet is the largest coal-powered machine ever created. It's estimated that 2 to 5% of global carbon emissions come from the internet. So if the internet was a country, it would actually be in the top 5 carbon polluters, and that's expected to grow dramatically as well. For a bit of comparison, the internet would probably be a bigger polluter than Japan. It's most likely a much bigger polluter than the aviation industry. And we're all the way down here, number 17. The internet is a massively bigger carbon polluter than our whole, the whole of the UK, which is crazy. So it's estimated that there are about 5.4 billion people using the internet. That's 2/3 of the world's population, and that number has increased in the past 5 years, by 45%. On average, people are predicted to use the internet for about 6 hours and 40 minutes a day. So, think about transactions and travel, work, entertainment, admin, health, life, death. It touches everything. The internet touches everything. We have to actively seek retreats away from the internet. That's how ingrained it is into everyday life. Blissful ignorance. So I think most people and most designers don't really realize the impact that the digital products and services are having on the natural world, because digital design is perceived to be invisible. You can't touch it or pick it up or smell it or walk through it or walk around it. You experience it through screens or virtually. You can kind of simulate those actions of doing that. But in our minds, we know that we can switch that on and off. It's not real. It's kind of it's in the air, and it's kind of parallel to our physical lives. So this causes this kind of disconnect between digital design and physical effect. If we can't see it, how can it be damaging the planet? And it doesn't help that the industry kind of buys into that narrative as well, like with the language that it's using, the cloud and virtual, Wi-Fi, airdrop. It's all very like airy, isn't it? It's all kind of separate to normal life. So, it was this kind of lightning bolt for me because of that disconnect, I think, that, the impact that it's having on the planet. So I took that question out to my network and kind of asked people. I was trying to understand like people's awareness and interest in sustainable digital design, but also like whether they feel they have the skills and knowledge to do it. And it was, kind of an interesting response. Like 100% of people are interested. Slight majority weren't really aware that it was a thing as well. But nobody said, yes, I've got the skills and knowledge and tools to kind of practice this right away. So, in general, we want to help, but we don't know how. So if we're going to tackle this as a design community, then we need that awareness and we need those skills. So if the internet is, producing all this carbon, how? Like, how does it have a carbon footprint? How does that work? So it all comes down to data and the energy that's used to kind of move that data around and to consume that data. So energy is used to store, to transfer data, and also by the end user, like consuming data on their device. So to kind of oversimplify something complex, just so we've all got this concept in our minds to hold, when you build a digital product or a service, the materials you use are kind of stored somewhere. So that's in the data center. There are thousands of data centers around the world. They're big and they're noisy and they're hungry for power. They get really hot, so they need to be cooled by water. There's a backup to everything. So they have 2 power sources going in. They've got 2 water cooling systems. So they're consuming resources like just to exist and just to store all this data. And then at the other end, then we've got the end user's devices. So this could be like laptops or TVs or phones. But whatever they are, they need to be powered by something. So they've either got a battery or they're plugged directly into the source. And they're consuming resources for you to consume content. So, when Henry accesses his favorite website on his phone, it's probably JurassicPark.com, something. The data that is stored over here in the data center needs to get to Henry's phone. And that's where the telecoms network comes in. So energy is used to power data around. The geographical distance matters as well. So like the further that distance is, the more energy is used. And the bigger that carbon footprint gets as well. And it's the time that Henry is spending online as well. So it's all kind of contributing. So we need to look at those journeys and those, that movement and all the data that's being stored and try and make it as efficient as possible, right? To break down that carbon footprint. Efficiency is the word. But we need to talk about efficiency, right? Efficiency is not the end of the story. So I'll tell you a little story. In the late 1700s, James Watts created this new steam engine which used coal way more efficiently. And this made coal more cost-effective. So obviously, like, everyone's excited. The industry, cost savings. That's what everyone wants to hear. All the opportunity this opens up. You can ship more. You can ship more quickly. You can ship further. So you can see what's happening here. Like, the efficiency then didn't actually cut down the energy consumption or the consumption of coal, but it drastically increased it. So this is known as the Jevons paradox, or also the rebound effect, where an increase in efficiency in resource use generates this increase in resource consumption. So efficiency alone then isn't enough to reduce the overall consumption, but it's got to be coupled with like policies or regulations to limit the use of energy and to kind of address that paradox and address the long term. Like, if you consider a cautionary tale of the humble email, for example, emails when they first became kind of popular, think of all the trees they're going to save, all that paper we're saving. But when you look at the stats now, 8.3 billion emails sent per day in the UK. When you divide that by the population, that's 124 emails per day per person. So I think we can all agree that emails haven't simply replaced writing a letter, because no one's writing 124 letters a day and paying for 124 stamps to send those letters as well. So in simpler terms then, when things are quick, easy, and cheap, we consume more of them. Now, I've tried to make this a really practical presentation and avoid climate anxiety, because we're a room full of smart people and we all know that there's a problem and we don't need this doom and gloom stuff. But this next bit of information kind of floored me when I read it in this web sustainability book. But it also helped to frame some of the thoughts I've been having about this kind of efficiency issue. So I'm talking about climate lag. So climate lag means that emissions don't impact the planet's climate instantaneously. Today we're experiencing the effects of greenhouse gas emissions generated in the 70s to 90s. So it's guaranteed to get worse in the next few decades, because we've already emitted that carbon. We're locked in these words. So it's pretty dark, right? But first we cry and then we act. So getting practical, next part. So I think as designers, we need this two-pronged attack. So we do need to make everything as efficient as possible, but we also need to think about making resilient products for the future. So efficiency then, I'll start with that. That's kind of the now. So as designers, we've got a lot of control over this. We can't control the user's device, but we can control what we serve to them and how we serve it. So the principles of sustainable web design would be, number one, eliminating anything unnecessary. Get rid of any of that data that, think of it traveling on that line or being stored. It's using carbon to exist. So get rid of anything that you don't need. Be disciplined. Secondly, improve the efficiency. So when you've got your cherry-picked assets and things, from point one, just make sure you're compressing them or saving them as the best file type. And then also using code to serve them in a more efficient way to people. And then the third one is mitigating what you've got left by using renewable energy source. So no matter what you're building, I think these same principles apply. Make it as small as possible, make it really efficient, and then use clean energy to do the rest. So, but what does efficient look like? What does good look like for a digital product? So there's this kind of problem with the word sustainable in this context, because sustainable by definition means causing little or no harm to the environment so that we can continue doing it in a sustainable way. But the best case scenario with kind of digital products and services is zero, so to not exist at all. So, it's not something we can work with, right? It's not achievable, and it's not good for our careers. It's just, zero is not good. So I think having this acceptance is kind of accepting that everything we do as humans is having some kind of negative impact on the natural environment. We have to consume resources to exist. It kind of gives you permission to continue designing, continue doing your job, but it gives you that context of doing it from zero up, being aware of everything you're using. So the objective then becomes how low can you go? And that's how low carbon can you go? But to do that, we need to know how much carbon we're emitting. So this is a tool called the website Carbon Calculator. So it measures the carbon emissions by measuring data transfer like across the wire when you're loading a page, calculating the amount of electricity, and then kind of converting that into a figure for CO2. So if I was to check Henry's favorite website, JurassicWorld.com, the result here, not looking too good. 1.2 grams of CO2 produced every time somebody accesses that web page. It looks quite a heavy page, so I guess that's what we'd be expecting. But it also kind of tells you whether it's run on sustainable energy as well. It's like looking at the host platform, so it's kind of telling you that too, which is helpful. And then to contrast that, this is the people who created the carbon calculator, Whole Grain Digital. So as expected, they've got a good result there, and something much smaller. But you can see from the look of their page, like they've still got images, like they do actually still have a bit of animation on there. It's not devoid of life. So there is stuff we can do there. So when you get designing, and with this carbon calculator, you can start like deciding on your page budget. So if you think about that zero figure, unachievable, but then if you measure like the current product that you have, if you have one, if you don't have one, then you can just have a bit of a measure with like best competitors and comparators to get like a best-in-class example. And then think about the bare minimum, like think about almost like a wireframe version of something that barely has anything. How little is that impact? And that gives you this kind of space in the middle to play with, right? This space to be in that how low can you go within that gap? It starts to give us a bit more of a framing for what we're trying to achieve. So with that carbon budget in mind then, you just need to kind of think while you're designing of each element and its carbon costs. Everything you're designing in as a carbon cost. So if you add this thing and it reduces efficiency, what's that cost versus value? Everything's got to earn its keep there on, in the product. And you can spend that budget strategically. So if you start thinking in terms of like journeys through an experience, you can have these kind of high impact moments and then offset them with kind of lower ones. So we don't need to like sacrifice everything great about, exploring the web. For example, you might want to have a real big brand presence on a landing page when somebody accesses whatever it is, your digital service. You might spend a bit more budget there on like maybe some video or imagery or animation or just something that makes it feel more exciting. But then, maybe the next page they go to is search results. Search results, you just want to get somebody through smoothly. They don't want, a lot of stimulation at that point, really. They just need something simple. And that's where you can really dial down your carbon footprint of this page. Again, you might want to dial up a little bit more when you get to a product family page, a bit more kind of brand moments coming in there. Make it a sort of longer moment for people to absorb and get excited and engaged. When they start getting into like a decision-making mode, on a product detail, you still got a bit more there, but you're dialing it down a bit more to kind of support the mode they're in. And then finally, when you get to something like a checkout, you just want that to be smooth, bang, 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 get people out. So yeah, this is kind of a model that we use anyway, right? To create brand cadence throughout a journey. There are definite moments when you just want it to be very simple. But so sustainability often has these kind of crossover with best practice anyway. So I've got another question for you now. So a website has 2 million views a month. How much would you have to shave off a single file to save 4 flights worth of carbon from Amsterdam to New York? I'm going to actually get you to put your hands up. So hands up for 1 kilobyte. Okay, a couple hands there. 1 megabyte? Yeah, a few more, I think. More than 1 kilobyte. 100 megabyte, what are we thinking? Yeah, a couple of hands there. So somewhere in the middle, I think, is general consensus. It's actually 1 kilobyte. Like, 1 kilobyte is minuscule, it's so tiny. You can shave off a single kilobyte from a file, and you're taking flights up the air. Like, the power, like, I was so excited when I learned this. Like, what power we've got as designers. I can take 4 flights out the air by taking 1 little kilobyte of a file. It's amazing. So where can we start? Like, where can we start taking these kilobytes away? To achieve that a low emission score, there's a lot of things at play here. There's like front-end assets, there's code, there's processes going on, but a lot of it has crossover with best practice design, to make things efficient. So I'm not going to talk through all of that, kind of best practice stuff, because that's something that you can find easily online, or you should be doing anyway, to make things load quickly and make experiences, easier to consume. And then there is also the Web Sustainability Guidelines, where there's a lot of info there as well, so you can have a look at that. But I kind of thought it was interesting to look at this like from a brand level. So, you can start to see how this is looking like a brand guideline, right? So, if you think of it from a brand level, you can, before you even get to building your digital product, you can start making these considerations and baking them into the styles that you're using all the time, your brand guide. Like starting with images, like images are really big offenders, they're generally pretty big, and they cost a lot in carbon. But like these 2 images are exactly the same dimensions. The only difference is the composition and like what's in the image. And you can see like choosing a simpler composition there has reduced it by 65% in file size. So detail equals data, basically. On the same kind of track as that then, blur also reduces file size. So you can start choosing things like a soft focus style within your brand guide. With this image, like you think maybe you want the story to be about this woman, like you don't necessarily need all that other detail around there because you want to bring the eye into her anyway. And doing that, adding this simple bit of blur, 43% file size reduction. Colors, so full color, like it's about the number of colors being used. So this one's stripped all the way to black and white, reduced in 40%. But obviously there's a few other stops along there. You don't have to go all the way down. And like artists have been using these techniques like for decades, like areas of high and low detail to, tell a story with an image and, bring your eye into where they want you to look. And it allows kind of images to like communicate what it is that, why are they there? Why are you adding them in the first place? So it's kind of this discipline in creating the images is going to make them more meaningful anyway. And like a quick look around the web, and you can see it's some of the high-end brands are kind of using these techniques anyway. Not necessarily because of sustainability, but because they create a high-end aesthetic anyway. So like using blur, simple compositions, motion blurs, quite slightly different style. They're putting more energy into an image, but still using blur. Removing backgrounds and using kind of graphical elements instead. Removing backgrounds completely, taking detail out. Using single colors or like a reduced palette. Using simple graphical shapes or illustrations, so there's kind of less data to read. Or removing detail and adding blur everywhere but where you want somebody to look. So these stylistic choices to make high-end aesthetic kind of coincide with sustainability, simple, selective, and disciplined. When it comes to video, kind of less is more. Videos are a big consumer of energy. So use them sparingly, keep them short and meaningful. On this example here, like I just had a go at like reducing the length of the video on Patagonia's website. And shaving those seconds off, like reduce the file size massively. So you've got to start thinking like, what is that video? What value is it adding? Like every millisecond counts. And actually, they are being an offender there by using autoplay. And like aside from the accessibility issues that autoplay creates with a video, our development team actually found that the computation of the page was like 80% higher when autoplay was added to that page, to that video. So yeah, it makes sense to not have things on autoplay. When we're talking about like graphical shapes, every point is adding detail and adding file size. So, I just, with this one, I just literally used the simplify tool in Illustrator, and it stripped out all of these points and reduced the file size massively. So color is an interesting one as well. With LED screens, they're like a single backlight, so it doesn't really matter what colors you use, the energy being used is going to be the same. But OLED screens, which are kind of trending up, like more and more manufacturers are using them now, every single pixel is a little tiny LED. So that starts to give us control over how much energy we want the user's screen to be burning. So white is the most energy-intensive color to use. And if you choose a dark background, you can reduce the energy used by about 90%. I think screen energy is roughly around 10% of the energy being used in general. And it's not just black and white as well. I was quite surprised by this when I saw like red and green coming quite close to black, but blue is 25% higher than green in like screen energy use. White's the most. So I guess you can aim for like a darker palette that uses more, less blue. Fonts as well. So every font style and weight has to be transferred individually. Apart from system fonts, which are free, they have no cost associated. You can be like little eco warriors going in and doing their work. So you can consider using these for like body copy, like the bulk stuff, where you don't need your high brand moment in there. And then when it comes to those like custom font styles that you want to bring in, each typeface is an additional weight, additional cost. So, do you really need 37 styles of Muso? Probably not. Like you can be more disciplined with your brand guide, make things look more consistent anyway, and you're stripping down the file size. And lastly, on this one, like no brand is going to define like a waffly tone of voice, right? But in practice, sometimes that kind of goes awry when you need to get content up quickly. And this is also about like the number of pages that people need to navigate through. So keep that content succinct, keep it relevant, and like keep the journey short. So from that, you can see that you can already start embracing sustainability right from the creation of your brand, and you're already partway there. And like the next step is to start compressing things using the right file type and doing all those other bits and pieces that letting the developers do their bit as well. So energy efficient websites are better at almost everything. So better performance, better user experience, and better inclusivity. So if nothing else, you've just produced something that's better all around. And it's going to be, everyone's going to be happy with a better performing website, especially for inclusivity, like those who don't can't afford lots of data as well. So it's starting to like tick those boxes as well and make it just a bit better for everybody. So we've built our efficient product, but what about this climate lag thing? What about the future? What might your product enable? Or what could it enable, So the job of designers includes a certain degree of prophecy. We've always got to have one foot firmly in the future. It's kind of a part of our design process and the way we work. And when we're talking about sustainability goals or effects, unintended consequences, they might not surface for like decades in the future. So thinking about that, I kind of felt like a good starting point is to start exploring that relationship between the digital product or service that you're designing and the planet. So I've got 4 kind of suggestions as food for thought on how we might start tackling this. The first one being mapping resources. So as part of like discovery, you're often like mapping to service mapping, journey mapping, but have like an extra swim lane where you can start exploring, what are the resources, the planet's resources that are being used at every step of the journey. Are there peaks there? Are there kind of unexpected moments that you didn't kind of anticipate before you did this? And you can include, like, the beauty of the service map as well is that, it's often, it's across physical and digital. It's not just about, the digital product you're building, but it's taking in, those physical touch points as well, which means you can start bringing physical product designers into the conversation as well, and other people who might have knowledge on this stuff to share. And it's just, giving everyone this kind of grounding thought of like, what is that relationship between the product and the planet? Next, I'm thinking about this kind of prophecy exercise. So prophesizing together as a team, as like a project team, get the client in there, get everybody in there together, thinking in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, what might that cost of success be? Like map out the best case scenarios and the worst case scenarios. And really try and discuss these and do this quickly together and get these ideas flowing and then think, this is going to highlight so many opportunities for designing in limitations or just, clever things that help to avoid some of these worst case scenarios, before they happen. And designing to mitigate them. The next one, so anti-KPIs is kind of a way to mitigate any potentially harmful situations. So it actually came up as a theme in Interact last year, quite a strong theme, lots of people talked about it, and I found it quite fascinating. But one kind of example that I really remember from that was this streaming platform. Their goal might be for people to stream more content. And users started to stream 3.2 hours of video on average. But that was in direct conflict, to the WHO's advice of for kids in particular. This is 1 hour per day is what they're recommending as the maximum. So it started to kind of open up these questions of how do we mitigate that? And as designers, we're trusted to be a part of these business decisions around KPIs as well. So it's really imperative that we, as designers, it's a bit like what Karade was talking about earlier. It's like bridging that gap, isn't it? Of how do we connect sustainability goals and values to business goals? How do we bridge that gap? In this case, to evolve business thinking in that way, it might be that it's possible to link customer retention to, more closely to well-being and happiness than simply to streaming more content. Because streaming more content in the long run might cause kind of depression or health issues or unhappiness across the board. So it's about finding those ways to, anti-KPIs and linking the business goals together as well. And then final thought is, designing cradle to grave. This is something that physical product designers do. They're thinking about the materials they're using, and at the end of a useful life of something, what happens to those materials? So we can do that too. We can think about if there's been periods of inactivity. If we've got users, then can we auto-delete all of their data, this data that's being, is on a data server somewhere costing us carbon. What can happen at the end of that life? Don't just be a data graveyard. I was actually really excited when I got this email, genuinely, about a week ago, until, and I was like, I don't even know what this is. I can't remember what UK TV play is. But I was excited about them deleting it until I read this, we'll delete your account and anonymize your data. I'm like, don't anonymize it, delete it. I don't want it. And you probably don't need it. So stop hoarding data. So so those 4 are kind of my food for thought, I guess, on how we might start kind of tackling this future. And a note on that, kind of like the elephant in the room, I suppose. Regulation, little sidestep. So much like kind of digital accessibility, we're expecting sort of this to become mandatory one way or another. It's going to become more kind of urgent to find those connections, between business goals and sustainability values. So it makes commercial sense, like, to start thinking about this now. So, I mean, the government already have their targets. They're already starting to hold businesses accountable for this stuff, for resource consumption, like starting to kind of ripple that down. And as climate effects continue, it's only going to get more pronounced. Think about this climate lag. So models to measure like social value are already being used like across public and private sector, and obviously that covers quite a wide variety of stuff, but sustainability is one of those. So it's going to become more and more in conversation. And if you can measure and prove your efforts and like your carbon footprint of your products, you're going to have this competitive advantage already. But what might this future be? Like, you can already add these kind of badges to your sites of how much CO2 it's emitting. There's a lot of these calculators now. That one I showed was kind of a sort of pioneer, but it's there's a lot of ways to be doing this, and a lot of products are doing it. But what might be next? Would it be a bit like when we're buying a house, this kind of energy efficiency rating of a product or service? Putting it more in the user's control, I guess, to make those decisions and be aware of what they're consuming. Or it could be something a bit more like energy limits or carbon taxes. Like, imagine accessing a website or trying to and being told, actually, this provider has, they've exceeded their daily energy limits, so you're going to have to try again tomorrow. So this could be a reality fairly soon. And actually, just last week, I think it was, the European Commission released this declaration on European digital rights and principles to promote a digital transition. And their proposal includes this sustainability pillar. And you can see in here, like where I've highlighted a little bit, they're already talking about, agreeing on methods to measure the positive and negative impacts of digital solutions, and also mentioning this, the keeping the rebound effects under control. So this is like hot off the press, and we've yet to see how it's going to manifest, but I'm just including it here because I just wanted to show like how kind of current this stuff is, in conversation. So, to summarize, I suppose, products built within constraints are often the most beautiful and best performing. And this is because they need to provide optimum performance under marginal conditions. So if you think about like high-end sports equipment, or gliders, or rock climbing, or chef's knives, that kind of thing, they all like work so well and look so well designed. And I think the future for our industry is going to be like this as well. It's exciting, Climate change is going to bring that constraint. It's going to bring that marginal condition, and that's going to be natural resources. And we've seen so much today about all of this technology that could change things. It could be the death of the image completely. What I was going through earlier could be like today, I'm talking about images, videos, but it could be the death of that anyway. We could be moving in all these different directions. That it's going to kind of push our creativity as designers and give rise to, I think, this new aesthetic, where it's less about kind of trends and following trends, and it's more about form and function. Like, what is it that you're designing, and what's that link between the planet and the natural resources? And, it might actually change the products that we're consuming quite drastically in the long run, and maybe change our behavior. And maybe, it might end up that we're spending less time online and more time in communities and in nature. And just as a kind of final note, I suppose, I was a bit cross with Henry for putting me last today. But actually, it's given me a really nice opportunity to kind of round off and say, if you're thinking about, all of this stuff we've been talking about, all the innovation, all of the AI and the voice, and all of these different directions we can go, what do they all share? Like, they all share this one big technology platform, which is planet Earth and planet Earth's resources. So, we're all going to be beholden to that eventually, and we're all going to have to start thinking in this way about our planet's natural resources and what it can provide. And I think that's just going to give rise to some really exciting innovation. So, if you remember just one thing from this talk, let it be that shaving off a single kilobyte can take out 4 flights from Amsterdam to New York. And if we all did that today, we'd all save here in a moment, immediately, 880 flights from Amsterdam to New York. That's just one single kilobyte. So use your power. And thank you for listening.